In 1976, Iran was one of the fastest-growing economies on Earth, GDP per capita at its highest point in history, double-digit annual growth for 15 consecutive years, a military ranked 5th in the world, an economy larger than Saudi Arabia's. 3 years later, a revolution changed everything. Today, the Iranian Rial has lost 99% of its value since 1979. Saudi Arabia took the same oil and built the world's most profitable company. Same resource, same religion, same region. Opposite decisions about power. Same oil, different choices. This is what 45 years of that looks like. Saudi Arabia and Iran share the same resource, the same religion, the same regional geography. The difference between $35,000 per capita and $5,000 per capita is not the oil. It is what each country decided to do with its relationship to the rest of the world after it found the oil. Saudi Arabia chose integration. Iran chose confrontation. The 1979 revolution did not just change Iran's politics, it changed the economics of every Iranian alive since. Chapter 1. Iran in 1976, the country that was going to win. To understand what the 1979 revolution cost Iran economically, you have to understand what Iran was in 1976. The answer is one of the most remarkable economic growth stories of the 20th century. Between 1963 and 1977, Iran's GDP grew at an average annual rate of 10.5%. This is the same growth rate that made South Korea and Taiwan economic miracles in the same period, and Iran sustained it for 15 years. Non-oil GDP grew even faster, at 11.5% annually, meaning the growth was not simply a function of oil prices. Iran was genuinely industrializing. By 1976, Iran's GDP per capita reached $10,261, measured in 2010 dollars, the highest level Iran has ever recorded before or since. The Shah's Iran had more private cars, more televisions, more refrigerators, and more university graduates than at any point in the country's modern history. In 1977, Iran was the world's 18th largest economy. Turkey was 20th, South Korea was 28th, Iran was ahead of both. The country that Iranians today compare their decline against, South Korea, the Asian tiger that industrialized in the same era, was smaller and poorer than Iran in 1977. By 2017, South Korea had become the 13th largest economy. Iran had fallen to 27th. The revolution and its consequences cost Iran approximately 40 years of economic convergence with the developed world. Iran's oil sector in the mid-1970s was producing 6 million barrels per day, the highest output in the country's history and one of the highest in the world at the time. The oil revenues from the 1973 price surge had given the Shah's government enormous resources. The White Revolution of the 1960s had modernized agriculture and expanded education. The country was, by every measurable metric, on a trajectory that pointed toward developed world status within a generation. Before I tell you what the revolution did to Iran's economy, I want you to hold this question. If you inherited one of the fastest-growing economies on Earth, with the 5th most powerful military, enormous oil revenues, and a modernizing population, what would you have to do to lose it all? Chapter 2. Saudi Arabia in 1976, the country that started behind. In 1976, Saudi Arabia was behind Iran on almost every measure of economic development. Iran had a larger GDP. Iran had more industry. Iran had more universities. Iran's GDP per capita was higher. Saudi Arabia's oil had been discovered in 1938, 30 years after Iran's, and the country had started from a much lower base of economic and institutional development. The Saudi state was newer, the population smaller, the administrative capacity more limited. What Saudi Arabia had in 1976 that Iran did not was a stable political relationship with the United States. The petrodollar agreement of 1974, negotiated between Henry Kissinger and Saudi officials after the 1973 oil embargo, had locked Saudi Arabia into a system where it priced its oil in U.S. dollars, recycled its oil revenues into U.S. Treasury bonds, and received American military protection in exchange. This relationship was the foundation on which everything Saudi Arabia built afterward rested. It was not morally neutral, but it was economically transformative. Saudi Arabia's choice was not between good and bad options. It was between confrontation and accommodation. Iran, under the Shah, had also maintained a relationship with the United States, and that relationship was a major grievance driving the revolution. The difference is that Saudi Arabia's relationship with the U.S. survived the 1970s, and Iran's did not. Everything that follows flows from that single divergence. Chapter 3, 1979, What the Revolution Did to the Economy. The Islamic Revolution of February 1979 changed Iran's political system in ways that are well documented. What is less often discussed is the immediate and comprehensive economic destruction it triggered. Within months of the revolution, the new government nationalized all major industries. Banks, factories, large businesses, insurance companies, all transferred to state ownership. The industrialists who had built Iran's manufacturing base, the car makers, the steel producers, the electronics manufacturers, fled the country. An estimated 100,000 to 150,000 educated professionals left Iran in 1979 alone. The Hayami brothers, who had built Iran's car industry from nothing into the 16th largest automotive sector in the world, emigrated and built successful businesses abroad. They were not the exception. They were representative of an entire industrial class that was simultaneously expelled and replaced by state ownership that had no idea how to run what it had seized. Foreign investment, already nervous before the revolution, stopped completely. The legal framework that had made investment possible was dismantled. Contracts with foreign companies were canceled. The U.S. Embassy hostage crisis from November 1979 to January 1981 triggered American sanctions that began the isolation of Iran from Western financial systems. It was the beginning of a 45-year cycle of confrontation, sanctions, partial relief, and renewed sanctions that made sustained economic development structurally impossible. Then came the Iran-Iraq War of 1980 to 1988. Saddam Hussein's invasion of Iran in September 1980, tacitly supported by the United States and the Gulf states, was the second catastrophic blow. The war cost Iran between $500 billion and $1 trillion in economic losses. Oil facilities were damaged. Infrastructure was destroyed. A generation of young men was consumed by a war that ended with no territorial changes and no strategic gain. GDP contracted sharply. Per capita income, which had peaked at $10,261 in 1976, fell to levels last seen in the 1960s. Chapter 4. The Rial, the currency that tells the whole story. The single statistic that captures 45 years of Iranian economic history better than any other is the exchange rate of the Rial against the U.S. dollar. In 1979, one U.S. dollar bought approximately 70 Iranian rials. Today, one U.S. dollar buys approximately 700,000 rials. The Iranian currency has lost 99.99% of its value against the dollar since the revolution. Not 50%, not 80%, not 90%, 99.99%. A family that held 1 million rials in savings in 1979, a significant sum, representing roughly $14,000, holds the equivalent of $1.40 today. This is not a normal outcome of monetary policy. It is the compounded result of multiple crises: the war of the 1980s, the sanctions of the 1990s, the nuclear-related sanctions of the 2010s, the maximum pressure campaign of 2018, and the structural inability of a sanctions-isolated economy to maintain currency stability. Each round of sanctions reduced Iran's ability to export oil, which is its primary source of foreign exchange. Each reduction in foreign exchange reserves triggered another round of Rial depreciation. Each round of depreciation triggered another round of inflation. The cycle has never been broken. Inflation in Iran averaged 32.5% annually in 2024. The cumulative inflation since 1979 is so large it is difficult to express in normal terms. Ordinary Iranians have watched their savings, their wages, and their purchasing power eroded by a monetary system that has been structurally unable to maintain stability under 45 years of economic isolation. Chapter 5. Aramco and the decision to keep it world-class. While Iran was nationalizing its oil industry and watching foreign expertise leave, Saudi Arabia made a completely different decision about what to do with its oil sector. Saudi Aramco was nationalized too, but differently. The Saudi government took full ownership of Aramco from the American oil companies between 1972 and 1980, but it did not expel the expertise. Saudi Arabia kept the foreign engineers and managers in place, kept the Western operational standards, and ran the company as a commercially disciplined operation rather than a political instrument. The result is the most profitable company in the history of capitalism. In 2022, Saudi Aramco recorded net profits of $161 billion, more than Apple, Microsoft, and Alphabet combined. In 2024, its profits were $129 billion. No company in human history has ever generated cash at anything close to this rate. The contrast to Iran's oil sector is stark. Iran in 1974 was producing 6 million barrels per day, one of the highest outputs in the world. Today, under the best conditions between sanction rounds, Iran produces approximately 3.3 million barrels per day. The infrastructure that generates Iran's oil wealth has never been modernized to the standard that Western technology and investment would have enabled. The country that had oil first, that was producing at higher rates in 1974, is today producing at roughly half the rate of Saudi Arabia, not because it has less oil, but because 45 years of isolation prevented the investment required to maintain and expand production.
Chapter 6. The Public Investment Fund, Turning Oil into Everything Else. Saudi Arabia's other crucial decision was to begin saving and investing its oil wealth rather than simply spending it. The Public Investment Fund, established in 1971, now manages approximately $900 billion in assets. It is one of the 5 largest sovereign wealth funds on Earth. It owns stakes in companies across every sector: technology, real estate, sports, entertainment, healthcare. When Saudi Arabia bought Newcastle United Football Club, when it launched the LIV Golf Series, when it signed Cristiano Ronaldo to the Saudi Pro League, these were not vanity projects. They were part of a coherent strategy to make Saudi Arabia an entertainment and tourism destination, to diversify revenue streams, and to build soft power that extends the kingdom's influence beyond oil. Vision 2030, Mohammed bin Salman's economic transformation plan announced in 2016, represents Saudi Arabia's attempt to complete what the petrodollar decades began: a full transition from an oil-dependent economy to a diversified one. Neom, the $500 billion futuristic city being built in the desert, is the most visible symbol of this ambition. Whether Neom succeeds or fails, the scale of the project is only possible because Saudi Arabia spent 45 years building an oil operation so efficient and a sovereign wealth fund so large that $500 billion of discretionary investment is possible. Iran, in the same 45 years, built nothing comparable.
Not because Iranians are less capable of such ambition. The pre-revolutionary trajectory of Iran's economy suggests exactly the opposite, but because the sanctions regime, the institutional destruction of the revolution, and the structural isolation from global capital markets made it impossible to accumulate and deploy wealth at this scale. Chapter 7. The numbers side by side. The graphic on your screen does not require extensive narration. Every row is a different expression of the same underlying story. But two rows in particular deserve attention. The first is GDP per capita in 1976 versus today. Iran's GDP per capita in 1976 was $10,261, higher than Saudi Arabia's at the time. Today, Saudi Arabia is at $35,121, and Iran is at $5,190. Iran has gone from being ahead to being less than 1/7 of its neighbor's income. That gap was created entirely by decisions made after 1979. The second is oil production. Iran discovered oil first in 1908, 30 years before Saudi Arabia. Iran was producing 6 million barrels per day in 1974. Saudi Arabia produces over 9 million barrels per day today. Iran produces 3.3 million. The country that had a 30-year head start in oil production is now producing at roughly 1/3 of its neighbor's rate, because isolation prevented the investment needed to maintain what it had. Chapter 8. Iran in 2026, the economy under maximum pressure. Iran in 2026 is experiencing what the government itself describes as an economic crisis. Inflation at 32.5%, the Rial at 700,000 per dollar. Protests, the most sustained the Islamic Republic has faced, erupting in late 2025 over electricity shortages, economic hardship, and political frustration. GDP growth of 3.7% in 2024, which sounds reasonable in isolation, is entirely a function of Iran pumping more oil under a partial relaxation of sanctions pressure from China's increased purchases. The structural problems, the absence of foreign investment, the inability to modernize the oil sector, the disconnection from global financial systems have not changed. Iran's GDP per capita on a purchasing power parity basis is approximately $19,874, higher than the nominal figure because domestic prices are so distorted by currency collapse. But even on PPP terms, Iran is far behind where it would have been had the 1963-1977 growth trajectory continued. The Atlantic Council has estimated that if Iran had continued its pre-revolutionary growth rate, it would today have a GDP per capita comparable to South Korea, above $30,000. Instead, it is at $5,190 nominal. The gap between where Iran is and where it would have been without the revolution is arguably the largest single policy-caused loss of economic output in modern history. Chapter 9. The verdict. Same oil, different decisions about power. Saudi Arabia is not a democracy. It does not have free elections, free press, or an independent judiciary. Its human rights record is one of the most criticized in the world. The murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi in 2018 shocked the international community and revealed the limits of any comfortable narrative about Saudi Arabia as a responsible state actor. MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, has consolidated more power in fewer hands than any Saudi leader before him. The Saudi model is not one that many countries would or should choose to emulate on its own terms. Iran is not a failed state. It has a highly educated population, among the highest university graduation rates in the Middle East, It has a large and sophisticated private sector that survives despite everything. It has maintained military and geopolitical influence across the region, in Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen, that no sanction has eliminated. Iran is a serious country with serious capabilities. What the revolution cost it was not capability. What it cost was the economic integration with the world that would have translated those capabilities into prosperity for ordinary Iranians. The lesson of this comparison is not about religion. Both countries are Islamic states. It is not about resources. Both sit on the same geology. It is not about culture or history. It is about one decision made in 1979, whether to integrate with the global economy or confront it. Saudi Arabia integrated. Iran confronted. The 45-year results are the comparison graphic you saw 10 minutes ago. The Iranian Rial in 1979, $70 per dollar. The Iranian Rial in 2026, $700,000 per dollar. The price of one decision, paid by every Iranian who has lived since. This is Macro Atlas. Thank you for watching.